The Cleveland Browns have signed a low-risk but very high-reward safety, Karl Joseph, strong safety, formerly of the Oakland slash Vegas Raiders, is going to the Cleveland Browns. Karl Joseph is a former first-round pick and a player at times with the Raiders that has shown a lot of promise. The problem with Joseph has been injuries. In 2016, he played 12 games. In 2017, he played 15, which is the most he's ever played. In 2018, he played 13. And in 2019, he played 9. So he's been on and off with injuries, often playing through injuries for a large portion of his Raiders career. I think with the Browns, there's an opportunity here to get the true potential of Karl Joseph. What Joseph is, if you use him correctly, is a very good in-box safety. I think of him as like a Patrick Chung or like one of those type of in-box downhill safeties. He's like a semi-linebacker. He's got pretty good size for the position. Like, he's a big dude. He's 5'10", but he's like 200 pounds. He's 26 years old. And Joseph, I don't really see as a cover guy. I think where you could see him be best at is that run stuffing safety. Like, if you utilize him the way that teams utilize like Landon Collins, like use him as a blitzer, use him as that versatile piece in the box that can add to the linebacking group. That's where Joseph plays best at. You don't want him to be man on guys. You don't want him to be deep as a free safety. That's not his game. He is an in-box guy, and that's where he's best at. He's a hard hitter. He's a good tackler, and he's a good athlete, but it's more in his deceptive power from the safety position and his lateral ability more so than his straight-up speed or just coverage ability. So Joseph overall, a player that I see as, again, a high pick in the past that can be turned from a diamond in the rough to a legitimate starter and actually a good player in the right scheme, in the right system. We'll have to see how Cleveland utilizes him this season in their defense. There's been some shifting in their philosophy on defense in recent seasons, and we'll just have to see what they think. I like the ad in terms of a fit, in terms of a need, because the Browns needed a safety badly coming into this free agency, and I'm not really surprised that they went after this player. I'm not surprised that they went after Karl Joseph, but I'm also a little bit surprised that they haven't gone after more of the free safety type. Maybe they still have yet to do that, and they still plan on doing that. But Joseph should play next year, at least in a 3-safety rotation, if not as a starter at strong safety. And like I said, at the very least, you take a chance on a former high draft pick. At the most, you get a good caliber box safety. So there you go. Karl Joseph going to the Cleveland Browns, helping this defense, a little bit of depth in the secondary for Cleveland. The Cleveland Browns have already made a couple big splashes this offseason. Of course, bringing in tight end Austin Hooper and tackle Jack Conklin. Both needs, both positions and players that I believe will instantly impact their offense. But they've also made 3 moves here that I think are going to be super under the radar. 3 underrated players that I think might have just as big of an impact and nobody is going to notice. I'm talking about Billings, defensive tackle of the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm talking about Kevin Johnson, cornerback of the Buffalo Bills. And perhaps the most interesting, Janovich of the Denver Broncos, fullback. These moves are great football moves, and these are kind of like football nerdy moves, and I feel like analytics are playing into these moves for sure for the Cleveland Browns. Let's start off with Billings, who for me was one of my underrated defensive free agents this offseason, a player that I felt played very well last year, but on a bad team. And when you look at Cleveland, I said that one of their needs was upgrading or at least providing depth for their interior defensive line. And that's exactly what Andrew Billings is going to give them. Not only that, but he's also extremely young, a young free agent. He's only 25 years old. He just turned 25 on March 6th. He's 6'1", 328, and he just had his best season of his career with the Bengals. At 24 years old, he had a sack, 35 tackles, and 4 quarterback hits. Advanced stats had him at 5 pressures, 13 last year, 5 this year, 2 hurries as well. So when you really look at it, he is not a big-time pass rusher. He's known for his run-stuffing ability. And that's where I thought like teams that might have played more of a traditional 3-4 defense would take a look at Billings and possibly go after him to be more of a nose tackle. But it's intriguing that the Bengals, they played more of the same front as the Cleveland Browns, more 4-man fronts in base defense, more 4-man fronts in their nickel and sub packages, and that's the exact type of role that Billings is going to play. So it's very transferable from Cincinnati to Cleveland. He's staying within Ohio with his team choice, but Billings, I think, is going to be a really good player. PFF ranked him as the 44th best interior defensive lineman. I think he's only getting better. Like I said, he's young, and I think he could develop a little bit of pass rushing skills. I think the intriguing part of this move is that you've been seeing that a lot of these interior players, especially the ones at the top of the list, have been paid a lot of money. Even guys that are like the same type of mold as a Billings. Like, let's say, for example, Michael Pierce, who I feel like is a pretty similar type of player, but he was paid much more money, maybe because he's a little bit more established, played a few more seasons, and he's in a high-profile team like the Baltimore Ravens. But here, you get a player for way less who plays just about the same role and extremely cheap. Very good value for the Cleveland Browns for this player. The next player is Kevin Johnson. Kevin Johnson, early in his career, he had some ups and downs and kind of finding his place in the NFL. He was a first-round pick for the Houston Texans, 16th overall in 2015, and I believe he just had his best season last year. He played 16 games for the Buffalo Bills. He played slot corner, and he kind of switched in between that role and playing as the 4th corner. So he was in sub-defense. He was in nickel packages. He also, let's check his snap counts for clarification. So he played 32% of the snaps, which is the second least he's ever played, but he played it at a higher level. He played 336 snaps. He played 232 on special teams, which is the most he's ever played, 56% of special team snaps. So he's provided that he could play a little bit more on special teams and give you value there as well if you're the Cleveland Browns. But where I was impressed by him is when you look at his advanced stats, 59% completion, under 60% allowed this season, 26 on 44 targets, a 79.8 rating, and touchdowns, he didn't allow one single touchdown. He had 36 tackles, and he did provide a little bit in terms of just tackling and not allowing much after the catch. He only allowed 103 yards after the catch. So overall, I mean, Kevin Johnson, for a player that didn't play a lot, proved that he could maybe get a bigger role somewhere else because Buffalo has one of the best secondaries in the league. So they weren't going to re-sign him. They had the depth. They just signed Josh Norman, so they were looking to move on from him, whatever it may be. Maybe they just didn't feel like they needed to re-sign him. But that meant that he was going to be a value somewhere else. And PFF ranked him as the 22nd best corner last season, which is pretty high marks. Of course, you got to take into account that he didn't play as many snaps as like a typical number 1 or a number 2 because he was a number 3 or a number 4. But I feel like for Cleveland, he could easily end up being their slot corner if need be. And maybe in a best case scenario, he could be the number 4 like he was in Buffalo. But he is definitely a player that's better suited for the nickel position or for covering slot receivers. He's 185. And like I said, a former first-round pick. And it seems like the Cleveland Browns are going after these players, high ceiling. And even here with Kevin Johnson, it's not like it's a low floor, because at least he could play special teams. If it doesn't all work out, he's not playing very well, at least he has a role there where he could play over 50% of the snaps for Buffalo. Should be able to do the same for Cleveland in that area of the game as well. So Kevin Johnson's another nice value add who graded well from an analytical perspective, and Cleveland's looking to add him to the secondary at a position that really they're having a bunch of players fight for. The nickel position is one for Cleveland that's up in the open. They have their number 1 and their number 2 corners, Greedy Williams and Denzel Ward, but they're looking for that third or that fourth guy, and Kevin Johnson could certainly be that guy. Now, the other one, which I'm really intrigued by, is Andy Janovich of the Denver Broncos, and he really just has been underutilized for the Broncos as a fullback. And I think where the NFL is going right now is you see the best offenses are utilizing the fullback position, notably the Patriots and the 49ers, and even to a certain degree, the Saints have all utilized the fullback position more than any other team in football. For the Browns, I feel like this is such a great ad because they are such a good running football team. They just brought in Conklin at right tackle, who's one of the best run-blocking tackles in the game. They have Nick Chubb. They have Kareem Hunt. And now you add Janovich, who was PFF's third best fullback last season. He didn't play a ton of snaps. Fullbacks don't play a lot of snaps in general. When taking a look at it, let's just check in comparison to some of the elite guys in the league. So he played 130 snaps, which just wasn't enough, I feel like. So Juszczyk played the most in the league, which is obvious. He played 500. For Baltimore's fullback, Ricard played 489. CJ Ham for the Vikings played 381. Zach Line, like I said, 216. Obviously, Devlin was out the entire year. So he was ranked 130 snaps, which was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th in snaps at the fullback position. But when you look at his run block grade, he was at 72, which is top 5. When you look at his pass block grade, he was top 10. When you look at his receiving grade, he was in there as well. So he has a little bit of Juszczyk in him. I'm not saying he's Kyle Juszczyk, but he's been underutilized. He's pretty athletic. Like, if you've ever seen him carry the football, I believe his first carry in the NFL was a touchdown. So that's the type of guy you're talking about. He's actually kind of built like Juszczyk is. He's athletic. He's 6'1", 238. 26 years old, and throughout the course of his career, the most carries he's ever had is 8. That's receptions. 8 receptions for 112 yards, like 5, 4, 5. That's his entire career. 6 carries is the most he's ever had in a season. The first season in his rookie year, he had 4 for 33 and a touchdown. He has 3 touchdowns in his career as well. So this is mostly about the blocking, though. This is mostly about being able to scheme up your offense in a way that you add this position to your offense. You add a good player at this position for very minimal, like, you didn't give up much. I think you gave up a 7th-round pick to get this guy in your building, and you can add more I formations now. You can go with more power sets, and you could play with the schemes of defenses. So if they have extra defensive backs on the field, you can throw him out there and have that power advantage versus defenses. So I really like this move. I think he has the opportunity to become one of the better fullbacks in the league, especially on this team. And I think this is very smart from the Browns. I think he'll fit what they're trying to do offensively. And it's smart in the way that they are just adding to what their strength was of last season, and that is running the football. And you add a fullback in there who is pretty good, underrated, undervalued, and you could potentially rise that value of your run game even more and get even more out of your run game because you can add more formations and more versatility to your run game. So I like it a lot. These 3 moves are awesome for the Browns, and I think they're super underrated, but they're definitely not going to go unnoticed from me.